to the Raising Joyful and Resilient Black Children podcast, the show that bridges conversations from parenting to child well-being and social justice. We are your hosts, Dr. Valerie Adams-Bass
and Dr. Sheretta Butler-Barnes.
In this special episode, we reflect on the first season and share our hopes for the future. Join us as we delve into the highlights and valuable insights we gained throughout this journey.
Absolutely.
So as we move into it, as we wrap up the first season of our podcast, Sheretta, what are some of the most impactful conversations we've had that resonated with you and our listeners? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think, again, all the conversations were great, but those that sort of stood out to me were, of course, the session on Black girls in math, when we had Dr. Nicole Joseph. And then what stood out to me was when we talked about Black mothers and their vulnerability.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's also while we're talking to them about some of the research and some of the things that we know, I also sort of learned lessons from them as well on what to do and how to be vulnerable. And I think because we are our mothers, it was hard not to sort of take some of the lessons that was learned from so many and then just to sort of evaluate and how I show up and kind of deal with my own vulnerability.
Absolutely.
So those were the top two that stood out for me. What about you?
That's funny because those were two that stood out for me, but I would say certainly with Dr. Nicole Joseph and hearing math, being a mother of a daughter who loves science,
yes,
hearing her passion and her experience. And then the other episode that stood out for me was Empower Her.
Oh, yes.
That episode was so fabulous with Dawn Brown because I felt like it was not only a conversation where we could intersperse questions for her that were related to our research, but more importantly, the jewels that she shared with parents and with practitioners and those who want to do this work well with young people. I feel like when I'm in spaces and people are saying, we don't know how to, and then to hear Dawn say, we've been doing this and this is how to get it done, and her ability to have conversations with us to share with both parents to say, here's how to support your girls, as well as those organizations, nonprofits and otherwise. I want to support girls and we need to figure out how to do it. I think sometimes as researchers, because of the discipline and the spaces that we occupy, we're looking for evidence-based and evaluation.
That's right.
And she does evaluation of that program, but the idea that she was, in addition to the evaluation of her program, she's saying, here's how this works, and here's the evidence from our parents. And when we receive that evidence, right, what they might call translational research, where we hear from the parents that they needed to, we embed that into our program.
That's right.
So we know that, there are limited experiences for girls to become certified divers. We integrate that into our program. So I loved that we could talk about it from a research perspective, but even more importantly, or equally important, was those organizations who are saying we want to do this well, to hear someone who's doing it well and really,
absolutely,
not just working with the girls, working with the communities, working with their families, trying to understand how best to work with their families versus sort of saying, well, the parents just don't get it, right? So acknowledging that the parents may not get it, but understanding why and figuring out how to work with those children and those parents. So I loved that episode as others.
Yeah, and that was one of my favorite episodes too, because, when we think about the work that we do, when you think about when people say community engaged work, youth-centered work, parent-centered work, she's doing it.
Absolutely.
And it also offers lessons to, because I even got off after we did the interview, how are the ways that I can sort of show up? She's been very successful. She's in these school districts. And it was really youth-led. And I think the biggest thing for me was sharing her lived experiences about sort of how her commitment to Black girls came about. So, yeah, I don't know how I could have forgotten about that. That was a good one, too.
Yeah, they were all so good. And I think the other that was, touched my heart and touched my academic hat was the idea of, promoting Black mental wellness for teens. And certainly it's a broad topic, and we really focus primarily on racial socialization as a mental health issue for young people. And I loved that because that's how I entered into the research arena, started doing that as a practitioner. But more importantly, I love that there's the journal. And, I was sharing it out to say, hey, check out this podcast, this particular episode. And not all, But many of the parents who send their children either to, magnet schools or independent schools, which are also known as private schools, their children are often isolated. The research shows that, particularly for once they become adolescents. And so, I had parents say to me, this is what was going on with my child, even those who were at public schools, and said, but I didn't know what this was, right? So we can talk amongst ourselves and say, oh, that's a racial encounter, right? That child might be struggling with their racial identity, and we can come up with some terms. But to hear a couple different parents, not just independent school parents, even the couple magnet school, which are the public schools, say, my child has been experiencing this. I didn't even know what to do. I didn't know what to call it. And I love it. I was so happy to listen to that episode, to share with other parents. So for me, that was so cool, because we know that the research demonstrates it's hard for Black parents to talk about racial socialization and the day-to-day encounters that they have, let alone to sort through and sift through maybe the, small bites, sound bites of conversation that their teens are having with them, and figure out, oh, they're having these racial encounters, and how do I support them as teens? So
absolutely.
I like that episode that, adults felt like I've got something now to have this conversation with my team. Yeah. So those are probably two of my favorite.
Yeah. I can go on and on. I think it's, because I was thinking about the financial.
Absolutely.
So interview with it. And that one stood out to me because of his commitment. Number one, coming through at HBCU where they sort of poured into him, and then coming out and saying, this is what I want to do for persons in my community. But then also, I think meeting young youth where they're at and showing them sort of how to invest in the different ways of investment.
Yes.
I also like that too, because there were some things that I didn't know, again, about the sneakerheads, like those folks who invest. And so I think that was really great too. Yeah. Always learning something. Yeah.
It was. Always. And I like that Jordan talked about that, not necessarily diminishing how young people are spending their money solely, and saying you shouldn't be spending your money this way, but giving them different perspectives, sharing different perspectives of it, right? So understanding that some young people may be buying those sneakers as an investment strategy, right? As a money-making strategy versus just wearing them to school, because we do know that there's some who wear those sneakers and don't even think about it. But then he said, no, we try to talk to them about how can you make money off of the amount that you're spending, and how you're standing in line to get this newest and latest sneaker. So I love that. Like I said, meeting young people where they are and helping them to expand their thoughts about how they invest, how they earn money, right? So how they secure the bag, as they say.
Exactly.
I loved it. It was good. Yeah.
And so we've talked about the episodes, right, in terms of what stood out to us. And so if we look at them sort of collectively, what do you think, what theme stands out like for our first season? Like, what theme would you say? I know that's a hard one. I'm even thinking about it in terms of process and thinking our thing. One of the things I could think of is just empowerment. I'm thinking of like strength-based. I'm thinking about the way that we sort of listen to where parents were at. We have like diverse perspectives, ideas, beliefs, generational.
Yeah.
So really the empowerment is one of the themes I can say, like throughout the episodes.
Yeah. And I don't want, this probably sounds kind of cheeky or like a plug for our show, which maybe it is for our podcast. But for me, what stood out was like resilience. But I say that in a more comprehensive, robust way. And when I say resilience, let me just share that most of our guests created or became what they were as professionals by responding to the needs of our community and choosing to respond to the needs of our community in a more asset-based way, right? So that was so, to me, beautiful, right? So this idea of joy and resilience. So this idea of, if you go back to Jordan in our money, our SIP episode, like we're sitting home during the pandemic. My friends and I had just graduated with tons of loans, and we're saying, what are we going to do? Let's do something. Let's not just do something in this moment where we can't be together physically, but let's do something that meets a need. Not just a need for us, right? Which they could have very much been like, we're just going to work on us, but we're going to meet a need, figure this out for ourselves, but figure this out for others so that they are not in our seat. And I love
the collectivism. Yeah, the collectivism. I love that.
So when I'm thinking about that, communal resilience, if you will, right? So this idea of we're going to help ourselves and we're going to help others, we're going to help others, and in turn, that's going to help me. So for me, it's like that communal resilience.
Communal resilience. That's
even when we think about, Candace, the pediatrician who talked about, hearing her patients and the relationships with their children and figuring out how to help them help their children from a different angle other than saying, let me check the temperature or let me make sure they're meeting their growth benchmarks, right? So I love that. And then the kind of conversation we had about where does the parenting come from, right? And can we acknowledge that, and can we try to face that and manage that in a different way? So I loved, and I feel like, again, this, communal responsibility and responsiveness, right? So it becomes this resiliency that is just amazing, right? And we hear that, and it reminds me of when we hear people say Black History 365, I am Black History, just idea that these are everyday people who are understanding, acknowledging, identifying the needs of our community, and not only wanting, but choosing to serve, right? Yes. And so I loved that sort of communal resilience was amazing. And for most of our episodes, when we were saying, okay, where do you find the joy? We attempted to do that in almost every episode. Folks were able to tell us, like our guests were able to say, this is the joy in this, or this is where you can lean into the joy. Even if you find yourself addressing a need that's very serious, could be serious. And so for me, I would say that, that resiliency, that communal resiliency was amazing to hear.
And even the commonality too among some of our guests as well too, like sharing and talking with each other as well too. I love that communal resilience piece.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So that's probably what I would say. And so we're coming together on that. And relatedly, our guests have definitely shared, their research, their experiences, their insights, some of them, their background, their biography, not just as professionals, but, as living individuals. And so when you think about when we would ask them, what's the joy or what's your takeaway? Sheretta, what's one takeaway that you would say you believe can significantly impact our listeners' journey as parents when you hear what we've been listening to? Yeah, another hard question.
No, that's a good hard
question, but a hard one.
I'm going to say this. For me, it is the idea that we can be vulnerable, that, again, like you said, it's this idea of communal resilience. But what I took away from it was like the persistence, sort of the perseverance that parents collectively have, and really trying to make sense in a world that is sort of highly racialized, and raising our Black children, Black women being vulnerable, empowering our community about financial wealth, creating programs, Empower Her for Black girls, and the ways they show up. So for me, it was this service-oriented, the things they were doing. I felt like that. And I don't know if I'm articulating it in the best way, but I think other parents sort of normalized what was sort of going on, whether it had to do with sort of mental health, finding programming for their children, financial wealth, Black girls' experiences in the classroom, having the talk. I think we did
that. Yeah.
I'm hoping that that's how we impacted parents' journey. And then even sharing some of our own experiences too.
Absolutely. And I would say, I would hope so too. And it sounds like, normalizing the Black parent experience, right?
That's it.
And our experience is definitely unique, right? It's diverse and yet unique.
Yes.
So hopefully that is something that our parents could come away from. It's if parents are feeling isolated or feeling like, I'm not sure if this is the right way to go about it or how I should go about it. Ideally, as you said, they come away from the show, they come away from listening to our episodes and say, okay, I've got an idea. I've got a resource that I can look to. Or maybe I'll see if there's a similar resource available in my community. So this idea that, the Black parenting experience is unique, right? So affirming that. And I think oftentimes as Black parents, when we make decisions that are really based on sort of a racialized experience, we can second guess, right? Or we can say, is this the right way? And I don't know that there is one way, but the idea that we are, letting parents know that these things do happen as you're parenting Black children, as you're working to protect them, to advocate for them, but also to build skills in them so that they are resilient.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Navigate the spaces that they occupy now, as well as spaces that they will occupy in the future.
Absolutely. And I love the way that you said that we have like unique, diverse parents, because we know Black families are not a monolith. Black folks are not a monolith, right? But just having all of sort of these different perspectives, I think, I'm hoping that the takeaway was, there were some similarities, there were differences, but like you said, it was resources and tools as well that we provided.
Yeah, and it was exciting to, as this being our first year and moving into space, to really be able to translate or to support and uplift these different experiences and organizations and say, this is how it connects, or these are questions that we need to ask as researchers, or that we need to give to parents to put into their toolkit when they're working with their children and guardians. I really think that that is amazing. And it was always interesting when a new episode would come out and I would say, check out this episode, to get that feedback, that instant feedback, which I would also say, don't forget to like and share,
exactly.
and subscribe to our podcast. But when, someone would text or email me and say, this episode was fabulous, I took the time to listen. So sometimes they would listen as soon as I shared it. Other times I'd run into someone or they'd send me a message, I listened to, I was driving, or I listened to it and it was really good. I'm like, of course it was really good. But, to hear folks say, that was good information, that was useful, I think is wonderful. And ideally, we can continue that moving forward.
I agree. So when we talk about moving forward, like looking ahead to the next season, what are your hopes and aspirations for the podcast?
Yeah, that's a great question.
How do we envision our discussions, right, to continue to empower and support the community?
Yeah, I hope that we are able to have a couple episodes where we can bring in one or two of our parents from the Joy Circle.
Oh, yeah.
To help us to think about, with some of our guests, right? They may have questions.
Absolutely.
I hope that we can also highlight some young people who are doing great things.
Absolutely.
It would be great, as well as, continue to hear from organizations and individuals who are doing great work, because we are talking about raising joyful and resilient Black children. And there's some young adult Black children, which are children, who are either high school students or college students who are still in the process of growing and maturing, but they too are doing great things for their peers. They may be doing things with the parents. I would love to have them.
Absolutely.
Our parents may have some questions for the topics that come to us and that we seek out that they may want to share or communicate with. So I would love for us to be able to do that in a way that, generates traction for our parents, right? That they come away from our podcast feeling fed, right? So
absolutely
informed and fed, right? So that they feel good. I like the idea of our podcast being part of the joy quotient, right? So sometimes we may talk about, topics that can be challenging. Those might be some of our topics, some of the topics that are a little bit more challenging to manage. But I would hope that as we bring in more guests, as we hopefully have a couple episodes with our parents, maybe some episodes with some young people, that, our parents, our listeners, our guardians, that they walk away with an elevated joy quotient, right?
Absolutely.
With the knowledge and some additional skills or resources, but their joy quotient is higher.
Absolutely.
Because being a parent can be tough, right? There are days when it's tough, and this whole vulnerability conversation with our Black mothers who were saying sometimes it's tough, and we have to be vulnerable to get help, and we have to be vulnerable to restore ourselves and be there for our children. So I would love for this to be a space where if parents are feeling vulnerable, and they come away with a higher joy quotient.
Ditto to everything that you said. And one of the things is that in addition to sort of continuing what we're doing, just attempting to have intergenerational conversations, like between youth and like adults, in terms of just really having a conversation among us to still be centering joy, but just to talk, right? Sometimes just to listen about what's going on, what's the most pressing issue, how to be supportive. I think the learning, the intergenerational conversations and a learning that could occur, I think that would be something that I will hope that we can do next season as well.
And I think it's so important,
Sheretta.
And I'm glad you bring that up, because when you bring that up, what I thought of was the recent Supreme Court's decision around affirmative action, right? And I think about within the past 4 or 5 years, we've had Beverly Tatum O'Neill's book, her second edition of Why Are the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria. And in that book, which I have, and I suggest others get the updated version, she talks about what it's like to talk about kids today who grew up with 8 years of President Obama, right?
That's right.
And I think about the Supreme Court case in a recent sort of chat space I was in where, multi-generational discussion among a family when the decision came out. And the younger generation was like, what is that? And why should I care?
Yeah.
And so that's a heavy topic, and that's a serious topic.
It's a heavy topic, but it's a discussion we got to have, right?
We got to have, right? And so that means that, there are many Black families who haven't been having that conversation. But we know that from research perspective. We may not know that from a practical perspective because we just live in day to day and try to figure it out. So this idea of these intergenerational conversations around different topics, I think, are so important because for some young people, I know my daughter attends Freedom School. One of the texts from years ago when I was involved was, this school used to be white, right? So for a young person who's in a school in a community, an urban community or multiracial community, they probably wouldn't even get the title of that text, right? So this text is all about affirmative action. So this idea of, Brown versus Board and, integrating schools, but for someone who goes to school where most of the children look like them, where it's a diverse school, and they're a young child, they may not know that. So these conversations and how we understand and how we navigate these spaces, multi-generational, I think will be edifying for all of us, right? So I like that idea.
Yeah, this is a space to have it. I think this is the space to have it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we could, use this space to have these conversations that we know are very necessary.
Yeah. So we are looking forward to a dynamic season 2, y'all.
Yeah, we've got lots to talk about.
We
know that our parents and our guests have lots to talk about, are thinking about. We'd love to hear from you. So when you are commenting and subscribing, if there are topics that you think you want us to cover, indeed, let us know what you think about our episodes. They're there for you to listen to. Maybe make some suggestions in the comments, and we'll see what we can do. They may already be on our list.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about, I would say, right, Sheretta?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it, for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you all for listening and sharing and following us and subscribing. We appreciate it. And as we conclude the first season of Raising Joyful and Resilient Black Children podcast, we really want to express our heartfelt gratitude to all of our listeners. Your support and engagement have truly been inspiring.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And we hope that the conversations we've had throughout this season have provided you with valuable insights, practical tools, and a sense of community. And again, just shouting out my co-host, this communal resilience. Yeah. So remember, you are not alone on this journey of parenting and nurturing joyful and resilient Black children.
Absolutely. Stay connected with us during the break by visiting our website at whatisblack.co. And again, it's whatisblack.co. You can access previous episodes, you can share them, explore additional resources, and sign up for our newsletter to stay informed about the upcoming season.
We are excited for the future and the opportunity to continue these meaningful conversations in our next season. We invite you to join us as we explore new topics, welcome inspiring guests, and provide even more support for our community.
Thank you once again for being a part of the Raising Joyful and Resilient Black Children podcast. Together, we can create a world where our children thrive, celebrate their identity, and navigate life's challenges with resilience and joy, all caps. Raising Joyful and Resilient Black Children podcast, a part of the Alive Podcast Network.
This podcast was created and produced by Jacqueline Duget with editing support from Manny Simon of Vita Productions. We are grateful for their dedication in bringing these important conversations to life. We invite you to follow, rate, and review our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and continue providing valuable content to our families.
Wishing you and your families continued joy and resilience. Until next season.
Until next season, y'all.